This is Your Homecoming with Cam Reddin on 2SSRFM 99.7.
One of the great elements of this year's commemoration of the ANZAC Centenary, 100 years of ANZAC, is that we've uncovered, and in many cases we've recovered, stories that have helped shape our nation, our communities and our local areas. Many of them drenched in history, and I don't think we often appreciate enough the value of having these stories written down. Well, Alan Clark is a South Coast author, and tonight is launching the centenary edition of his book, The South Coast Waratahs, Recruiting March of 1915. It's a great story, there's so much history behind it, and to find out a little bit more, Alan is good enough to give me some time on this afternoon show. Alan, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Cameron.
Mate, thanks so much for your time. Tell me a little bit about the Waratahs March. What was this all about? What's some of the history here?
Well, the Cooee March was the first one to be formed in 1915 when recruiting was falling off a little bit, and so the Cooee started at Gilgandra and went through to Sydney in October and November of 1915.
Wow.
And while that was happening, well, various others around the state were being organised, and I'm interested in the Waratahs, who started at Nowra on the 30th of November 1915. And went through to Sydney over the following 18 days.
That is an incredibly long march. I mean, we're looking here through Nowra, from up through Gerringong, through Wollongong. I mean, that would take a hell of a long time, I would have thought.
Yeah, well, they did it in about 18 days, and they didn't march on the two Sundays that were there, but they had a given time that they marched every day, and they didn't. Not many of them had problems marching along. I guess that they did a lot more walking in those days than what we do now.
Yeah, I imagine so. Who were some of the people that made this up? Were these just everyday people off the street and thought, right, we're going to go and make a difference?
Yeah, quite a few of them were labouring types, and particularly, well, around Nowra there were quite a few farming people, and then up Kiama there were a lot of people working in the quarries up there. But there are a few bank clerks and things like that, but they were mainly labouring types without great education.
With a sense of service as well.
Yes, they were encouraged to enlist, and they didn't give it a second thought, really.
I want to ask you about the first edition of the book. Now, you first published this back in 1994. What made you want to decide to release a new edition, the centenary one that's launching tonight? Yeah,
well, 1994, that was pre-internet days.
Yeah, that's right.
So I was able to trace names through the newspapers and got their dossiers and looked at them, but some of them proved to be wrong. But right. Now when we've got the internet and we've got newspapers available online from that time, where you can find out so much more about them, and by using basic genealogical skills, where you can. I've tried to put a story to each of the men. There are about 120 reached Sydney, and I've got 106 named, and I've tried to look at their lives before the war and those who came back, what they did afterwards. But, just every man's got a different story to tell.
Well, that's right. I mean, there's so much history in not just behind each battalion, between each group, but to the individuals here. And that's what I'm looking forward to getting my hands on the book for, because it tells stories of the individuals behind this. Who are some of the ones that stand out? What stories really struck home for you?
Yeah, there's only one that I know of enlisted at Sutherland, and he was a bloke by the name of William Barry. And Helensburgh claims him these days, and there's a photo of him on the War Memorial website with his 6 children, his wife and 6 children. And the interesting story about that is that the youngest was born 2 months after he left for overseas, and he called her Nancy Waratah, and he was killed later in the war, so he never got to hold his little baby girl.
As so many did.
That's right, but he's in the photo with them, so there's some photographic trickery there that's gone on to put the whole family together.
Gee, that's extraordinary, some of these stories. How do you come about these stories? Is it simply just about sort of spending hours looking through dossiers, looking through pages on the internet? Because there's 80 pages that have been added to this new edition from the one that was released in 1994. What's the process like coming up with this information? Is it hours spent in books? Is it talking to locals? How did you find it?
There's not very many people to talk to.
Yeah, that's the thing.
There's a few descendants have got basic knowledge, but not a lot of them. So it was a matter of looking through their dossiers. Sometimes they were 20 pages, sometimes they were 50 pages, sort of thing. So, and I've spread the word as much as I can to get photographs of as many of the men as possible. And so you just look at every man individually and see what you can find out about him, and to find out what he ticked and the support that he had from home and all these sorts of things.
How significant do you feel this story is, not just to the specific area, but more generally for the South Coast and for the Southern Sydney, for the history of the area? How significant do you think this is?
Yeah, I think it's extremely significant, because everywhere along the way there were support groups, there were recruiting associations, there were Red Cross branches, there were churches, there were all sorts of organisations, and they backed these men and they farewelled them, and those who came back, well, they welcomed them back. They often met on the station, and then they held functions for them. So, they were treated as heroes. And
as they should be. Do we know how many came back?
Of the 106 that I've got, 31 were either killed in action or died of wounds, sort of thing. So it was a fair percentage didn't come back. And those who did come back, a few of them died during
the trauma of it all,
the 1920s, and so but some of them had a fairly hard time. But
absolutely. Look, there's just so much history to this, and you find what I find great about it, and about books like yours as well, is that you find these stories within little communities that would be so easy to overlook sometimes. But I think that it's so important that we write these stories down. We have them in books, that we have them in writing, not just for the South Coast, but for right across Australia and right for these areas. So I think it's a fantastic thing that you're doing, getting this a revised one, re-looking at the facts, not rewriting history, but regathering it, and for stories to tell. I think it's fantastic. Alan, tell me about the book launch tonight. It's launching tonight in Nowra, I believe.
Yes, it's in the Nowra RSL sub-branch is assisted in the publication, and they're hosting the launch in the RSL rooms just next to the ex-Servos Club. And that's this evening, and then tomorrow afternoon with all the descendants and relatives who've come to town for the centenary, we've got a gathering for them. And then on Sunday morning, well, there's going to be a march reenactment start at the Nowra Showground, where they did 100 years ago. Right. A farewell at the School of Arts, and then marching across the old Nowra Bridge to the Bomaderry Railway Station, and a steam train's going to be there and take people to Berry and Gerringong, where there's going to be services on the same day at those places.
Fantastic. So all those details, again, they'll be on the Facebook page, and we'll pop them up on the website for anyone that wants to jump along. It should be a great day. Look, Alan, we really appreciate your time. I know you've got the launch tonight, so particularly straight before that, I really appreciate your time, mate. How can we get our hands on the book?
Well, up your way, the War Bookshop at Loftus, Clive Baker, he's got copies there, so that might be the easiest way for your listeners.
Fantastic. That sounds great. Alan, I really appreciate your time. I hope it all goes well.
Thanks very much, Cameron.
It is 4:30 on the dot. That is Alan Clark, South Coast author of the new book, and his new revision of the book, the centenary edition of the South Coast Waratahs Recruiting March in 1915. As I say, the book is launching tonight. It'll be about $20, $25. The War Bookshop in Loftus, a great place to get it, in all good bookstores as well. And I'll reiterate, I think it is so important that we have local stories like this written down. I know of people, I know of family, friends who have had people in their family have held on to these stories for a very long time. Veterans that have returned, and stories of communities. And I just think it is so important for our national history, for our local history, that stories like this are written down, and they're materialised in book form or whatever form it is. So I think it's due to authors and due to people like Alan, who are dedicated enough to do the research here, to get the stories right, and to tell these stories that helped shape our nation.
This is Your Homecoming with Cam Reddin on 2SSR.